The land was brittle. November had not brought snow, only a wind that scoured the prairie and left the sky an empty, pitiless gray. Sagebrush cracked underfoot, the earth split with thirst. A woman came walking down the rutted road, her long coat torn at the hem, her boots dust-caked and half unlaced. She moved with the slow, mechanical rhythm of someone past exhaustion. On her hip, the smaller child stirred and whimpered. The older one trailed close behind, silent, clutching the edge of her mother's sleeve as if it were the only true thing left in the world. She had not spoken in 2 hours. There was nothing more to say. The last house had turned them away before she even finished her sentence. Too many mouths already. Times were tight. A man had stared down at her from his porch, a shotgun resting easy in his lap, and even though he hadn't raised it, she'd felt it press against her ribs all the same. The sun dipped lower behind her, red and flat and cruel. Her shadow stretched ahead across the dry ground like a warning. With each step she counted the weight. Her own body hollow from hunger. The boy in her arms fevered and twitching. The girl so small, too quiet. And the bundle in her pack, the last crust of cornbread, a Bible with the spine torn loose, and a folded letter she had read more than 30 times. The handwriting was neat, formal, kind in the way a stranger tries to be. If ever you find yourself with nowhere left to go, come to Houston. Ask for Elias Hart. He owes a debt. She did not know who had written it. Her husband had kept the letter tucked in his shaving tin, alongside old coins and bits of string. She'd found it after the cholera took him same week. The baby started coughing. The baby didn't make it. Neither did the cow. By the time the house came into view, she wasn't sure it was real. White fence, half-fallen barn, slanted but still standing, a sagging porch that looked like it had stories to tell. The sky behind it was deepening now, the first pinpricks of stars rising like a promise or a warning. She reached the gate and stopped. Her legs shook. Her arm ached from holding the boy. Her dress stuck to her back with sweat. It had been 6 days since they left Bastrop, 2 since the last wagon passed without stopping. She tried to raise her hand to knock, but her fingers wouldn't cooperate. It wasn't pride that stopped her, it was something heavier. That awful blank question, what if this man says no? Before she could decide, the door opened. He stood there in the frame, tall and hard-shouldered, hands calloused and quiet. His hair was graying at the temples. He wore no gun at his side, no badge, no hat. Just a loose shirt, worn jeans, and eyes that had seen enough to know the shape of sorrow. She didn't speak. Her mouth was dry and full of dust. She felt the girl beside her grip tighter. His gaze moved from the children to her face, and something in it softened. Not pity, he didn't look like the kind of man who trafficked in pity. Just a quiet recognition, like he knew the road she'd walk because he'd walked his own. He stepped back and held the door open. "You're home," he said. Nothing more. She hesitated only a moment longer, then crossed the threshold. The warmth hit her like a wave. Firelight flickered low in a stone hearth. The air smelled of beans and coffee and cedar. She staggered slightly, her knees giving a little. He took the boy from her arms without asking, cradled him with a gentleness that startled her. She blinked, and tears sprang up unbidden, scalding the corners of her eyes. He laid the boy on a cot near the fire and brought a wet cloth for his head. Then he turned to her. "You hungry?" She nodded once. He disappeared into the back and returned with a bowl. She sat on the floor and took it in shaking hands. Beans and cornbread, the first real food in days. She fed the girl first, watched her chew in slow disbelief like she didn't trust it. Then she ate. It was only when her hunger began to ease that her body started to tremble. Her vision blurred. Her breath hitched. The man knelt beside the cot, watching the fire. "I'm Clara," she said, voice hoarse. "Clara June Wallace." He nodded once. "Elias." She looked at him, at the strong line of his jaw, the tired slope of his shoulders. and wondered what it was he owed and to whom. But for now she said nothing more. The fire cracked. The wind howled outside, pulling at the corners of the house. Inside all was still. Morning came pale and slow, creeping through the cracked window panes like it was unsure of its welcome. Clara woke with her back against the wall, her daughter curled in the crook of her arm, and her son still asleep on the cot by the fire. His breathing was quieter now, but still shallow, his skin slick with sweat. She sat up, muscles aching, neck stiff, and glanced around the room. The house was humble, 2 rooms divided by a hanging sheet with a cast-iron stove, a small table and shelves lined with jars of preserves and dry goods. Nothing fancy. Nothing wasted. Elias stood outside, the door open just enough to let in the smell of frost and manure. He was splitting wood, slow and methodical, each strike of the axe sending a sharp crack into the stillness. There was rhythm to it, anger worked out with patience. She watched him a moment, drawn by something in the shape of his solitude. She rose, tucked the girl under a worn quilt, and stepped out. The air bit her cheeks. Frost glistened on the fence posts and the roof of the barn. A hawk circled high above, wings outstretched, hunting. She hugged her arms around herself, trying to quiet the nerves in her belly. He didn't look up. "Coffee's on the stove. I can help." He set another log on the block, raised the axe. "Let the boy rest. Let yourself rest." "I can't," she said too fast. "I've been resting too long." That made him pause. He looked up, then not unkindly. "All right." He handed her a smaller axe, one with a nick in the handle. She took it wordless. The wood was knotted and cold beneath her fingers. The first swing was weak, the second worse, but she kept at it. Sweat broke across her shoulders. Her arms burned. He didn't correct her form, didn't take the axe away, just split log after log beside her, saying nothing. By midday the sun had melted the frost and turned the yard into thick mud. She sat on the porch steps, rubbing her hands, fingers red and raw. Elias brought her a tin cup of coffee, black and sharp. She sipped it, let the warmth cut through the ache. "You came from Bastrop?" he asked. She nodded. "Before that, Tyler?" "Before that doesn't matter." He didn't press, just sat on the rail with one boot propped on the post, his coat open to the wind. There was a scar on his neck, half hidden by stubble, like a blade had kissed him but changed its mind. "My husband's name was Walter," she said. "Worked with mules. Died last spring." He only nodded, slow. "I buried our youngest 2 days later. Then the fever came for the rest of the town. We left before it could find us." "You did right," he said. Clara stared out at the land. Empty pastures stretched to the horizon, flat and silent. The barn roof was caved in at one end. A broken wagon leaned against the fence, the wheels splintered. "You live out here alone?" "I have," he said. She waited, but he didn't offer more. That night she cooked beans and boiled salt pork while the girl gathered kindling. Elias returned late from checking the far pasture, his hands dirty, one sleeve torn. He looked surprised by the smell of food and more surprised by the way Clara had tidied the house, swept the floor, washed the children's clothes, laid out blankets. He didn't say anything, just sat down and ate like a man not used to company but not offended by it either. The boy coughed once, then again. Clara was on her feet before the second cough died, damp cloth in hand. She sat beside him, wiping his brow, whispering his name, James. Elias watched from the table. "She's strong," he said, motioning toward the girl who had fallen asleep on the floor with a stick doll tucked under her chin. "She had to be," Clara murmured. He nodded again, slow, thoughtful. When the fire had burned low and the house went quiet, Elias stepped outside. Clara followed him after a while, wrapped in a shawl. He stood by the fence, looking out at the stars like they were something he could read. "I never met your husband," he said. No. but I met a man who said he owed a Wallace his life some years back." "Might have been yours." Clara looked up at him. The wind caught her shawl and tugged at her braid. "I guess I owe him mine now," she said. Elias didn't answer. He just kept watching the stars like they might write the rest of the story for him. If you believe mercy has power, subscribe and follow these stories of endurance and grace. The days settled into a rhythm quiet and firm as boot heels on hard earth. Mornings were cold afternoons, dust-choked and dry nights so still Clara could hear her own breathing echo off the walls. James's fever broke by the 4th day, and with it came sleep, deep, blessed, still sleep. He clung to her less now. His appetite returned. She wept quietly over his first bowl of oats, head bowed as if in prayer, spoon trembling in her hand. Elias never asked questions, never told her what to do. He worked sunrise to dusk mending fence lines, checking cattle and teaching her in wordless gestures how to manage a place like his, where the well rope frayed, where the coyotes lurked, where the stove smoked when the wind turned north. He made space for her and her children, but never reached too far, never asked for anything back. That distance, that quiet, felt more like respect than indifference. Clara took to the chores without waiting for permission. She scrubbed clothes on a washboard by the pump, taught her daughter to collect eggs, patched Elias's shirts with thread from her pack. It was the work that steadied her. The feel of things in her hands, soaked cloth, wood, was proof that she was still real, still useful. She remembered the farm in Tyler, the mud between the rows, the sound of her husband's laughter in the corn. He had been a gentle man, too gentle maybe. The kind who let the world walk over him, who kept saying it'd all turn right if they just held on. Then the fever came, and holding on wasn't enough. One morning, Clara found Elias out by the barn, standing over the broken wagon with a crowbar in hand. "I can help mend that," she said. He glanced at her. "You know wagons. I know wood. My daddy was a cooper." That earned the hint of a smile. Not much, just a crease at the corner of his mouth, but it felt like a door had opened an inch. They worked side by side, fitting new slats, scraping rust from the axle. He spoke little but listened when she did. She told him about Tyler, about the trees that grew thick along the Sabine, about the way her mother braided her hair so tight her scalp would ache. He shared almost nothing in return. Not out of secrecy, more like habit, as though no one had asked in a long time. She saw things in him, though, without being told. The way he paused at the graveyard behind the barn each evening just for a breath. The way he kept a photo tucked between the pages of a ledger in the kitchen, 2 children, one dark-haired girl, one boy with a lopsided grin. He never mentioned them, and she didn't ask. Grief had its own pace. She knew better than to hurry it. Still, she wondered. Late one evening, after the children had gone to sleep, she stepped outside with a blanket around her shoulders. Elias was there again, sitting on the porch rail, eyes on the dark field. "I saw the graves," she said softly. He didn't move. "I put the fence up after the war. Said I'd never leave them without something to hold them in." Clara nodded, the ache in his voice settling deep in her ribs. "How long's it been?" He exhaled slow. 10 years. My wife. My daughter. Smallpox. She stood beside him in silence, the night air thick with old ghosts. "I can still hear her laugh sometimes," he said. "The little one. Lizzie. Used to sit right where you're standing, feet swinging off the rail. Thought the whole world was hers." Clara wrapped her blanket tighter, heart cracking at the edges. "That kind of love doesn't go," she said. "It just changes shape." Elias looked at her, and this time he didn't look away. His eyes were tired but not closed off. There was something blooming slow behind them, something old, something kind. "You remind me of her," he said. "The girl." "No," he said, voice almost a whisper. "The woman who raised her." Clara felt her throat tighten, but she held his gaze. "I'm not her," she said. "I don't know if I'm even myself anymore." "You're here," he said. "That's enough." They stood like that for a long time, nothing between them but the sound of the wind over dry grass and the warm breath of two people learning how to be near each other again. The first snow came sudden, swept down from the north like a warning. One moment the land was bare and cracked. The next it was a hush of white, smoothing out the scars, hiding the splinters. The children ran outside in bare hands and stocking feet, laughing, catching flakes on their tongues. Clara watched from the porch, her arms folded, breath clouding. It had been a long time since she'd seen them smile like that. She wasn't sure whether to trust it. Elias brought in extra firewood. The cows huddled near the barn, steam rising off their flanks. He taught Clara how to keep the water from freezing in the troughs, how to trap rabbits with string and bent wire, how to listen for the high whine of wind that meant a storm was coming. Most evenings after the chores were done, and the children asleep, Clara would sit by the fire with her sewing, and Elias would sit across from her whittling or reading in low light. It was a quiet life, but not a lonely one. The silences between them began to feel less like distance and more like a kind of knowing. One night she caught him watching her, not in the way men sometimes watched women, but with something gentler, more cautious. Like he was asking her a question without using words. She didn't answer. She just held his gaze a moment longer than usual before looking away. Then came the letter. It arrived in a stranger's hand, delivered by a ranch hand passing through from the east. Elias opened it at the table, eyes narrowing as he read. Clara watched his mouth flatten, his jaw clench. "What is it?" she asked. He passed her the page. The handwriting was neat, sharp, exacting. To Elias Hart, you are hereby notified of claim proceedings concerning the deed to Section 32, Range 11. The claim has been submitted on behalf of Miles Carrington, asserting a prior family agreement nullified by abandonment. You have 30 days to respond. Beneath it was a signature Clara didn't recognize, but Elias seemed to. She folded the letter slowly. "Who's Miles Carrington?" "Cousin," he said flat. "Sort of." She waited, but he didn't go on. "What does he want?" "The land." Clara stared at the floorboards. "Can he take it?" "He can try." That night, Elias didn't sit by the fire. He rode out to the far pasture alone, didn't return until the moon was high. Clara sat up waiting, though she didn't know why. When he came in, his boots tracked mud across the floor, and his eyes were shadowed. "Why would he come for it now?" she asked. "Because he thinks I won't fight." "Will you?" Elias didn't answer. The next day she found the deed buried in a tin box beneath the floorboards, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with string. His name was there, written in a hand that looked like it had been shaking. A land grant dated 1874, signed by a man now long dead. "They won't care about paper," he said when she showed it to him. "Carrington's got money, lawyers, influence. Then we fight some other way." He looked at her, startled. She nodded, slow but sure. "This place saved my life, my children's lives. I'm not leaving it without a fight." It was the first time either of them had said anything close to we. From that day on, the air between them shifted. Not fast, not loud, but firm. Clara stopped thinking of herself as a guest. She knew the well's depth, the way the snow slid off the barn roof, the creak of the porch under her left foot. She belonged to the place now, or maybe it belonged to her too. One evening she saw Elias standing in the doorway, holding the deed again. His thumb brushed the signature like it was something sacred. "I buried too much to walk away now," he said quietly. She stepped toward him. Her voice didn't shake. "Then we stay." He looked at her, and this time there was no caution in his gaze. Just something deep and worn and grateful. "You sure?" "Yes." The wind howled outside, but inside the fire held. They went to town together the next morning. Clara wore the best of what she had, a dark wool skirt mended twice and a blue shawl she'd hidden at the bottom of her pack when the world started to fall apart. She braided her daughter's hair, wiped the boy's face clean, and lifted them both into Elias's wagon. Elias loaded the deed and his ledger into a satchel and tied it to the seat beside him. No one said much on the ride. The road into Houston was rutted with frozen mud, and the wind smelled of iron and chimney soot. It was a harder town than Clara remembered from her first pass through months ago. The buildings looked the same, leaning wooden shop saloons with names scorched into the planks. But the people seemed sharper, less curious, more cautious. They tied the horse outside the sheriff's office. Clara stayed in the wagon with the children. Elias went in alone. She watched him through the window, a shape outlined by dusty glass standing too straight like a man holding old pain in his back and trying not to show it. He came out 15 minutes later, face hard, jaw working. "What'd he say?" she asked as he climbed back into the seat. "They'll look into it," Elias said. That meant nothing, and they both knew it. They stopped by the Mercantile. Clara needed flour lice soap thread. She left the children with Elias and stepped inside. The warmth of the stove hit her first, then the smell of pine shells and stale biscuits. Two women were already inside, speaking in hushed voices. Clara caught the edge of it as she passed. "She's staying with Elias Hart, if you can believe that. Widow, they say. 2 young ones. No ring. She won't last the winter out there. Not once the Carringtons come for it." They went quiet when she walked by, eyes flat and distant like cold stones. Clara didn't flinch. She took what she needed and placed it on the counter. "Put it on Hart's account," she said. The clerk, an older man with ink-stained hands, raised a brow but didn't argue. That was something. Back at the ranch, the wind had picked up. Snow flurried sideways, brushing like fingers across the windows. Elias sat at the table long after dinner, going over the deed again and again, as if willing it to hold. Clara stood at the stove, drying plates, her hands moving without thought. "You ever think about selling?" she asked finally. He didn't look up. "No. You could. Take the money. Go west. Start again. This land's the only thing left that remembers them." Clara didn't need to ask who them meant. "And if you lose it—" He closed the ledger, rubbed a hand down his face. "Then I lose them all over again." She came to sit across from him. The lantern flickered between them, throwing his shadow long across the wall. "You haven't lost them," she said. "They're in the way you build your fences, in the way you say her name without saying it. This place, it holds what they left behind. But you hold the rest." He met her eyes, then steady. "And what do you hold, Claire?" She hesitated. The question hit deep. "I hold on to mornings, when the children wake up hungry, when my hands ache from work. I hold on to what still needs doing." He nodded slow. Outside, the wind slammed against the house, shaking the shutters. Clara stood and crossed to the fire. She added another log, watched the sparks leap. The children were asleep in the corner, curled beneath thick quilts. "Safe for now? You said once that you owed someone your life," she said, not turning. "I did." She looked over her shoulder. "Who?" Elias's mouth twitched somewhere between pain and memory. "Your husband?" Claire turned fully now, breath caught in her chest. "He pulled me out of a stampede," Elias said. "I'd fallen, broke my leg. Cattle coming right over. I should died. He hauled me out by the belt. Never knew his name, but I remembered his face. Years later I saw it again in you." Clara sank to the chair, hands gripping the arms tight. "You saved us," she whispered. "No," he said. "I just gave back what was already mine to give." They sat there a long time in the hush that followed the kind that only comes when something broken has finally shifted just a little toward being whole again. Winter deepened. Snow came in waves, now thick and clean, muffling the world in silence. The land shrank under white fences, swallowed whole trails lost, and remade each morning with the thaw and freeze. The house creaked under the cold like an old ship, but it held. The stove burned constant, fed by the woodpile Elias and Clara had built with their own blistered hands. The letter from Carrington's lawyer sat folded on the mantel, unchanged, unanswered. 30 days had become 20, then 15. Clara rose earlier each morning, her body moving before her mind caught up. She tended the fire-mixed cornmeal, washed clothes stiff with frost. Elias taught James how to carve wood, how to walk the fence line and count rails. The girl Lily took to the barn cats, spoke to them in whispers only they could understand. They had begun calling Elias Mr. Hart, but with a softness that made it feel like something else. Like maybe Pa was waiting in the wings. One night, Clara found him in the barn after dark, hammering a new hinge into the stall gate. His lantern swung low, the light catching in the hollows of his cheeks. She stood in the doorway, a moment, breath ghosting in front of her. "You don't sleep much," she said. Elias didn't stop working. "Sleep's never been loyal." She stepped closer. "Neither has the law." He gave a short breath, maybe a laugh, maybe not. "Carrington'll come, paper in hand, riding a fine horse with his coat buttoned high. He'll talk about contracts and family obligation, about what was promised to him before blood turned cold. And—" Elias set the hammer down, turned to face her. "And I'll stand here, just like this, on the land I built with my own hands. And I'll say no." She reached out, then slow, her fingers brushing the edge of his coat. "You won't be standing alone." He looked at her like she'd just handed him a future he didn't think he was allowed to want. His hand came up, unsure, hovering near her cheek, then falling away. "I don't know how to start again," he said. "Not at my age." Clara took his hand, rough and cold, and placed it against her heart. "You already did." They didn't kiss. Not yet. Yet. It wasn't time. But something passed between them, solid, sure. Not promise, not yet. But something close. Something you could lean against when the wind picked up. When Carrington arrived, it was just as Elias had said. He came with 2 men in clean hats and cleaner boots, carrying a briefcase and wearing a face too smooth to trust. Clara watched from the porch, Lily on her hip, as Elias met them at the fence. The conversation was quiet but firm, the kind that traveled like thunder even without sound. Carrington gestured toward the house. Elias didn't flinch. The man took out the deed copy, unfolded it neat and pointed. Elias stood still. Clara could see his hand at his side, clenched hard. Then Elias turned, walked back toward the porch without a word. The 3 men followed, slower, smug. Elias climbed the steps, took Clara's hand in front of them, and said it plain. "This is Clara Wallace. Her husband died owing me nothing. She and her children live here now. This is their home." Carrington blinked, faltered. "The deed's sound," Elias said loud enough for the wind to carry. "Your time's up. You can take your paper and ride back where you came from." The men stood there too long, unsure. Then they turned, rode out without a word. Clara stared after them until the dust disappeared. Elias looked at her. That might not be the end of it. She smiled, just a little. Maybe not. But it's a start. That night they shared bread, beans, and laughter that surprised them both. The children fell asleep to the sound of a fiddle Elias's pulled down from a closet, like it hadn't seen light in years. He played slow, sweet songs, notes lingering in the corners of the room like warmth. When the fire burned low and the house settled quiet again, Clara leaned into him, head on his shoulder. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of what the morning would bring. Spring didn't come all at once. It never did out here. It crept in slow, in the thaw of creek water, in the green push of wild onion through the soil, in the way the cattle no longer steamed in the mornings. Clara felt it first, not in the land, but in her own bones. A loosening, a quiet kind of waking. She planted a garden with her bare hands, breaking the hard ground with a rusted hoe Elias had nearly thrown out. James helped her scatter seed. Lily brought water in an old coffee tin, her boots soaked through by the time she finished. Elias watched from the porch, arms crossed. It might not take. Clara didn't look up. It might. He smiled at that, just faint. And something in his posture softened like a man remembering how to believe. The Carringtons didn't return. Maybe they figured there was nothing to take. Maybe the sight of Clara and the children and Elias standing shoulder to shoulder had made them think twice. Or maybe, for once, the land itself had spoken. Clara woke each morning now to the smell of coffee, already brewed firewood stacked neat by the door, the low murmur of Elias's voice as he taught James how to measure a beam, how to check a horse's hooves. Her hands, once raw and split, grew strong, calloused. She no longer counted days. Some evenings she and Elias would walk the pasture together, saying little, just letting the quiet carry them. One dusk, with the sun bleeding gold across the grass, he stopped beside the lone sycamore and reached into his pocket. "I kept this," he said, holding out the letter, the one that brought her here. "All these years. Never knew why." She took it, unfolded it, slow, the creases like scars in the paper. "Because you hoped someone would come." He nodded. "And you did." Clara folded the letter again, slipped it into her apron. "You could have sent me away. Would been easier." "No," he said. "Easier don't always mean right." They stood like that for a while, shoulder to shoulder, the wind lifting her braid and carrying it toward him. He reached out and touched the end of it gently, like something sacred. "You ever think about staying?" he asked. She turned to him, eyes steady. "I already am." He kissed her then, slow, careful, like a man not asking permission but offering something instead. She didn't pull away. Her hand came up to his chest, rested there. When they parted, the look between them said the rest. They married in late May beneath that same sycamore. The children wore flowers in their hair, picked from the edge of the creek. There was no preacher, no guests. Just the wind, the grass, and two voices that had earned their right to speak vows. "I don't need a ring to know what I've chosen," Clara said, "but I'll wear one for them, so they'll know what love looks like when it stays." Elias slipped the band onto her hand, his mother's, cleaned and warmed in his palm. "This place was never a home without you." Afterward, they sat on the porch and drank coffee as the sun dipped low. Lily fell asleep in Elias's lap. James leaned into Clara's side. The cattle stirred in the distance, soft sounds in a quiet world. Inside the house, the fiddle waited, tucked in its case. Outside, the garden had begun to sprout. The past was still there. It always would be. But now, so was a future. Not promised. Not easy, but real. Rooted deep in the same soil that had once swallowed their grief. They would build on it, together. If this story stirred something deep within you, subscribe and let the journey continue.